Hey everyone, happy new year. Welcome to our first pre-recorded session or episode of the year. I'm your host, Leslie Richardson. Welcome to Visual Studio Toolbox. And today I am joined by the great Microsoft MVP, Brian Randell. Hey, Brian.
Hello, hello, hello. How are you?
Good to see you. No stranger to the show.
Yeah, it's always good to be back and talk about one of my favorite tools.
Yeah. And speaking of favorite things, we're talking about debugging, which is one of my favorite topics personally. And specifically, we're talking about an area of debugging that I think is in high demand, but just does not get the focus a lot of the time when it comes to talking about debugging tips and tricks. And that is multi project debugging. So I think that's something that a lot of people probably have encountered at least once or twice if you're dealing with multiple project applications. And it's notorious, at least historically, for not always being the easiest thing to do. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, for some of you that may be watching, go, oh, I know all this. Well, great. Maybe we'll learn some tips and tricks. But if you're new to this, I'm just going to really start at the beginning because we forget sometimes how good Visual Studio is. This is one of those examples. It just works. And, we're going to start simple. This will be something you can follow along with, do it at home. It's gonna be just local on a machine. We're gonna use web API, a WinForms client, and a SQL Server database. Very, meat and potatoes type of application, but it's something that just works. But we're gonna point out a few things that maybe you didn't know, and cover some of the enhancements that have made over the last few release cycles. And then again, maybe we come back later. We'll do something more complex and go, off machine with remote debugging or something like that. But this is really a bread and butter type thing that sometimes we forget about. We just expect people to know. And, it's like, don't you know how to do that? Like, well, actually, no. It's like, yeah, I know how to set,
Right.
yeah, whatever. So we're going to show that.
I think with debugging in general and the VS space, it's such a huge space with a lot of really cool features, and everyone just acts like, "Oh, yeah, I totally know all the tools and things that we could be using," and that's not always the case, and
Oh,
it's a shame because there's some cool stuff to talk
oh
about.
yeah, totally. I mean, like just when you say the word breakpoint, there's breakpoints, but there's conditional breakpoints.
Yeah,
There's
there's a
trace points.
ton of breakpoints, yeah.
Yeah, so and that's the thing, right? Visual Studio is just world class in that respect. And I think that's probably the big thing with all the changes going on and the need to build all these different types of applications, different front ends, different back ends. People just don't realize how awesome Visual Studio is until you kind of step back and just start with the basics and go, it just works. I mean, just wow. And then again, you can layer with complexity like containers. You can add your remote debugging to from a Windows machine to an ARM machine. You know, .NET MAUI, the ability to debug, iOS and Android applications. So, it's really powerful. But this is kind of like that final new experience. Let's just start from the basics, make sure everybody knows it, and look at a couple recent enhancements, and then kind of get people on their way.
Sounds good. So, shall we hop in?
Yeah,
Starting with
let's
something
just
new?
get right to Visual Studio. No slides, no nothing. Let's just get right to as I said, the meat and potatoes of debugging. So I'm of course running Visual Studio 2026. I'm using the new Plum theme, which I love. And in fact, you'll note that I am using the latest version that came out yesterday, the latest stable 18.2.0. So I'm going to start with just creating a common thing, and particularly when we think about building modern solutions, something using .NET 10 that would be like a web service. We'll use a web API project that you could host just about anywhere, right? Obviously on a
Mhm.
local Windows machine, but you can deploy it to a Docker container, deploy it to Azure PaaS, go crazy and use a Kubernetes cluster. So this is a common way to modernize is do your backend first, yet you maybe still have traditional clients. So we're going to say new project, and you'll see right here, I've got some previous ones I used, and we'll just pick the ASP.NET Core Web API project. We'll hit next. And you'll notice I even have a folder here for prep. So I'm just going to get rid of that and we'll call this VS Toolbox Live. And then we'll come over here and we'll call this, well, how about VST Live.web API? Okay. And without the K, because we're not doing Kubernetes today. And we'll hit next. And we'll just pick .NET 10 long term support, which is fantastic, fast and fresh and new. We'll just use HTTPS, and all the defaults are great for me. And again, I'm not promoting any type of style here. What I love about this out of the box template, if we come over here and zoom in, is that it's going to give me some starter code. So you'll see, for example, it's got the demo weather forecast.cs file, and that is going to represent my data. So it's going to give me weather information. And then if we come over here under controllers, because I chose to use the old school format, you'll see we have a controller that returns the weather forecast. So what it'll do is we'll ask it to give us the forecast, and it'll give us the next 5 days using some random stuff. So really straightforward and simple, okay? Now, out of the box, this should just work. So let's just come over here and do a build. And 2 seconds later, it's ready. And now if we come over here to the top, you can see I've got various debug configuration settings I can pick from. This one is the HTTPS debug target. Okay, and that naming I'm using, I'm being very pedantic and specific about. But this is what would happen if you just pressed F5. Now, we'll give it a second. And with modern .NET web APIs and web applications, by default, they're going to launch when you pick that profile in Kestrel, which is the local managed runtime. You can also, of course, use IIS Express, and other things if you want, or other web hosts. But the point is, this is where it's running. And you'll note that it's giving me a few different, and we'll zoom in there a few different endpoints. And we're going to use the HTTPS endpoint there. So I'm going to come over here. I'm just going to copy that. And then I'm going to go to my client. In this case, my client is your friend and mine, the web browser. Now, when I hit that, it doesn't work. That's disappointing. But remember, I'm not hitting a web site. I'm hitting a web service. So if we go a little further, we might do something like weather forecast. And there we
There you
go.
go.
Wow, that is just really beautiful. Well,
It's so pretty. I love it.
so
Yeah,
what
the
we're seeing
black
is
and the white.
we'll click pretty print, and what we see here is that we have now whoops, I went the wrong way with the arrow. We have the current date, and we have the made up temperature in Celsius and in Fahrenheit. And actually, it's a little warmer here, but that's not bad. It definitely isn't chilly. But you can see these different temperatures and stuff all return. And that's all it does, but that's good enough. That said, I don't think most of our users are going to want to use their web browser to use this weather tool, right?
I can't imagine why.
I think, yeah, the tour de force that is JSON,
Oh, yeah.
reading it.
The
So
JSON diehards out there are screaming right
yeah,
now,
they're
just
like,
like,
it's
"What?"
wonderful.
Yeah. I don't need
Which
any UI. Get out of here with that.
So I'm going to build a UI. Now, of course, since I'm using modern .NET, I could do a number of things. I could build a website to talk to it, but we already have a web piece of technology. So let's introduce some complexity and use client technology. I'm running on Windows. And sure, I could use WinUI. I could use WPF. But I know from experience working with my customers, tons of people out there are using Windows Forms. And in fact, one of my customers has a project, or has their line of business application that has just under 400 projects. I mean, it's a monster. They've been working on it since the first release of .NET, and that really
Ooh.
speaks to the testament how awesome .NET is. I don't get
Yeah.
paid to say this, folks. I'm just telling you, I have a real customer that is in business. They make millions of dollars a year, and
Yep.
it's Windows Forms, folks, and that's
Yeah, I
fantastic.
work on the .NET team, and I am paid to say that, so, it's more genuine coming from you.
Yeah. But so what we want to be able to do is call this. So first of all, I've got something on my clipboard. So we're going to go over to Notepad and go to this first tab. And if I paste it in, that's the base URL. And so we're going to take that and we're going to put that in here for future use by the client. We're going to want to get that out of config. So let's go back to Visual Studio. And like I said, let's create a Windows Form client. So we come over here and say add new project, and we'll pick Windows Forms. Click next. And understand I'm using Windows Forms with .NET FX. Now, I want to make a point to that. This is one of the great things about Visual Studio, allowing you to mix and match different runtimes, different types of technology. And of course, while I am a .NET developer, basically .NET and T-SQL, if you do managed code and you're working with C++, or sorry, native code with C++, you can do this. It'll work great here as well. If you're more of a web developer and you want to do things like JavaScript, you can do this. So let's just be clear. I'm just picking something that's well known in the industry, what people use, and what I know. And so again, we're going to come over here and we're going to call this VST Live, and we'll call this WF Net FX for .NET Framework. And notice then it says, oh, do you want .NET 10 support? And somehow, no, that's not what I want. I lied when I said file new. So let's do it again. File, add, new project. Oh, I picked the wrong one. I had Windows Forms for the new version, and I have Notice.NET Framework. So whoever's at home and was trying to buzz in and say, Brian, you messed up. It's this one. You got me. So let's do it again real quick. I caught myself. VST Live. And there you go. It's not recorded, right, Leslie? We are real humans. We are not
Yep.
AI.
We are not AI, pleased to say.
WF Net FX. And we'll use .NET Framework 4.8.1, the latest and greatest for that. And there we go, a tour de force user interface. Now, as you can expect, it's a Windows format, so I'm going to need to do the buttons. So we'll come over here and view the toolbox. And due to my brain is old, there it is. Okay, give
Kudos.
it a
I just use
second.
good old Control Q when I don't know where it is.
Oh man, yes, there you go. And we will then add a text box. That's all we really need. And over there, drop that in. And because Windows Forms lets you do this, we will do things like make it multi-line, since we're going to return some JSON, and we'll even make it giant. And we're going to do a little feature here of Windows Forms. We're going to come over here, and we're going to go to the Forms font, and we're going to make it bigger all around so people can really see this beautiful data that we're going to give them. So how about, I don't know, 18? Whoa, there you go. Now we're talking. And let's just come over here, and if we set this as the startup project, F5, make sure you can see it on the screen. Let's see, is it too big? Oh, it's just going to fit. Look at that. Perfect. Okay. So now we'll go change that button. We'll give it a better name, like BTN Get Weather Forecast. And oh, let's change the caption because that's just, offends my sensibility there. Okay, that fits. And we'll give the text box a name like TXT Forecast. Now, it's possible I haven't remembered the names I used because, yes, I'm going to use the really impressive style of programmatic inheritance known as clipboard inheritance to copy and paste code from Notepad. But we'll get to that in a second. So you saw that I changed the startup project to Windows Forms. Now,
Yep.
I want Windows Forms to call my web service. The web service returns JSON, so we're going to need a little bit of help there. And since we're going to parse JSON with .NET-FX, that's not built in. And so what we need to do is go to manage our NuGet packages. And we can just right click here and say manage NuGet packages. And so if we come over here, we can type JSON. And nothing's installed, but if I browse, there it is. Ninsoft JSON, a tour de force package that people have been using since forever. And I've got my dialogue a little giant here. I can't really see, so this is the downside of making the font so big.
Yeah. Heads up, people. The reason why you're able to see this font right now is because most guests and myself, anytime we demo online, usually have to bump up the font to an obnoxious size so that it's actually visible on everyone's screen. So
Well, I'm gonna guess that I picked the right one and that's gonna work. So let's
sweet.
we're gonna find out. So I'm gonna build. We can see the build succeeded down there. By the way, if you're curious, I am looking down here right there to make sure that the build succeeded. So okay, so let's double click on the button, and there's a couple things we need to do. Number one, we don't need all these usings, so we could do something like refactor and remove them or make AI do it, but we'll leave that for a second, and we'll go back over to Notepad. And if we look at the project references, I said we had to add Newtonsoft via NuGet. But I also need something called system.configuration. So system.configuration is going to allow me to read things like the web service URL from a config file. And there's a method to my madness here why I'm even going this far. So if we go to our project again, we're going to do an add reference because this is one of the components that is included with the .NET framework. And we'll scroll down here. Let me make this a little bigger. There we go. Giant font. Perfect. And you'll see we're going to pick system.configuration, this one right here. So we're going to pick that, click OK. So now I've got my references, and we're going to add 2 additional usings, one for system.configuration and one for nunsoft.json.link. And again, just to save typing, if I did want to do that, I could type more. Now, 2 things we need to do. Number 1, we're going to need that URL. Number 2, we have to call the server. And number 3, we're going to have to parse the data. Again, could use AI or Brian could prep and just write the code early. So that's what I've done. I've got the code and we're going to walk through what's going on. It's really straightforward. Now, I named the control, I think, TXT forecast. So I'm going to have to fix that. There we go. Tab. Whoops, I lost the focus. Go. And looks like everything else is fine. Okay, so let's start at the top here. First of all, I'm going to use system.net.http HTTP client. All right, so this is going to make my connection to the remote server. I'm then going to set the base URL, and this is useful when you might want to be calling different web service endpoints. Naturally, if you only have one, you can just put this in here, but I'll set that as my base URL. But we'll notice that it's getting it using configuration manager.app settings server base URL. So if we go to app config, we're going to need that data in there. What is that going to look like? We go back to my first tab and we grab this little block of XML. Oh my goodness. Yes, we're doing the way back dance. Okay. So this, as you remember, was the URL I copied when I ran it in debug mode earlier. Now we come back over to our form and look at our code. And I basically hook up to the endpoint and I call the get async method, because it's a get method, on the web service weather forecast, and I get the results. Now, I could do something like await here and not do result. That would work fine as well. But then I could do async and everything else. So for this little demo, I was lazy and I chose to do it this way. Again, don't at me and hate me. I'm
Yeah, usually best to go good old async route, especially when you're dealing with UI, but for now,
Yeah,
I'll
this
forgive
is
you.
simple, but it's all local again. And again, we're focused on the debugging experience, not my C# code here.
Yeah.
In either case, assuming it doesn't bloat up, we're going to come back, get the weather data, and then we're going to parse it with JArray, and then we're just going to make it a little nicer so it looks good inside the text box. That's all this is. So let's press F5, click the button, and survey says no. Why? Connection was actively refused. This is a common thing people say, and they're like, "What do you mean it was refused?"
Yeah, it's like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah, exactly.
It's giving the energy of I don't feel like it. That's why I hate this message.
I just I think I think I want to see it in Visual Studio 2026 .8. I want to see like an icon with a hand. Talk to the hand. Forget it here.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I can analyze this with Copilot and stuff, but some of you at home are going, dude, the web service isn't running. Da-da, exactly. And this is right. The whole point of this session we're doing here is, I need that web service running in order for me to talk to it. So I, of course, could go through some big deployment things, set up a CI/CD pipeline, but I'm still writing the code. So
Right.
what are we going to do? So you come over here to the Solution Explorer, and if you right click, you'll see that there is an option called, you guessed it. Whoops, I keep hitting the wrong. Hanselman is freaking out right now. He's like, dude, practice your Zoom in more. And I really did. I promise God, I
It's
practiced.
hard. I'm really bad at the zoom in, honestly. Like, it's why I bump up my thought fonts all the time. I'm like, gosh, I can't, like, I already struggled to just click on things and drag things as is. and especially when I'm nervous, and then it's like trying to zoom is
Yes, it's that thing
disaster.
right there. So now I've got the arrow all figured out, we'll do it there. There you go. That one
Hey.
right. So anyway, um, yeah, don't let Scott watch this. Anyway, configure starter projects. Now we're getting into the fun bits. So what happens is, by default, it's set to single startup because that's what I changed it from when I had the web service. But now if I pick multiple startup projects, magic happens. It creates a profile. And with that profile, it says, okay, you have 2 projects. What do you want the action to be when you start debugging? So we notice that we have web API and then WF.NETFX. So it's just in alphabetical order. And so we can set the startup action to be none, don't run, and usually do that for DLL projects, etc., because they're hosted by the one that loads it. Start, we want to start that, or start without debugging. Now, this is useful when you have a large set of projects you're debugging, and you need something to run, but you don't care about it. You don't have this. You don't want to debug into it. You don't want to look at it. You just need it running. But we're
It's a
gonna
nice
want
performance saver, I
yes.
think is the big thing about it, yeah.
Well, yeah.
You're not having to attach this giant debugger to
What is this
each project.
performance you speak of? Doesn't everybody
Yeah,
just have the fastest machine with SSDs and tons of
I
memory?
know.
Yeah, performance definitely is a great reason as well. I'm glad you said that. But we want to be able to show debugging, so we're going to do that. And then with the .NET FX, we want that. And yes, top to bottom is how it starts. So now we've done this. Notice there's also this debug target. Now, for the Windows Phone project, there isn't anyone, and I'll talk about that a bit later. But if we click on the Web API project, you'll notice there are 4 choices. Those are the same choices that showed up when I went to the debug menu. These are known as debug targets that are controlled via the local settings file that's available inside modern .NET SDK projects. Footnote, yes, you can do that with Windows Forms, but again, I took the traditional XML-based project file format, so that's why there's a difference. And you'll notice there's our HTTPS target that I used earlier. So I'm going to pick that one, and I'm going to click OK. Now, if you'll notice up here, notice how it says New Profile. Oh, that's probably why I want to come back in there, go to Configure, click on it, and then you'll notice that there are a bunch of different items here. There's a new, and let me zoom in for a second. So I can create a new launch profile. I can rename, I can delete, and I can also copy. So we're going to come over here and we're going to choose the rename, and we're just going to call this client server.
I
And
will
we'll,
say one of my, wish list items currently is that that window will get the same treatment that the settings window just got with the whole inline tab thing.
oh, there, I love Visual Studio, but it's so big. There's always places. It's like remodeling, your house, right? If you're lucky enough to have a house, or just think about redoing your apartment or your bedroom or anything, where it's like you want to rearrange and do new paint and all this stuff. Visual Studio, there's always little nooks and crannies we want to change because we use it all the time and we love it. But again, I love come on. I have to say it. Visual Studio 2026, so fast. It just starts up.
Yeah,
Boom, it's lightning.
it's, like,
Okay,
noticeable.
it's amazing. So now if we come over here to our weather forecast controller, we can come over here and we can put a breakpoint. And if we come back over to our client application, right, we can come in here and see we can also do a breakpoint here. But how about I just run it? So we'll click start. And now what you'll notice is down here at the bottom, there's my web service running. There's my client. And when I click weather, I'm on the client. And if I just hit F5, I'm now on the server. And it just works. Visual Studio does all the attach process, all the things that if you used other platforms or other tools, can be just horrible. And I'm just thinking about it. The original debugging I learned was printf debugging. Yeah, old
Yeah.
school, right? To be able to do this and get access to all the great things, the data and information is just wonderful. So now I hit F5 and there's my data returned from the server. And again, it just works to the point that people are watching going, "This is so simple." Exactly, but I've got some we're gonna go a little extra and do a couple things. But that is it. It just works, and those, projects excuse me, starter project settings really give you lots of flexibility. So let's go over here and let's open up properties and let's go to launch settings. So we see it's just a JSON file. And you can see in here that there's this HTTP and HTTPS setting. And so you can adjust this by just changing it here. You don't have to go to the UI if you don't want to. So if you're you're happy with the text file, you can do that as well. And in fact, for example, you'll notice it has both formats, and I can say, you know what, I just wanted to show that one. If you want to mess with some of these settings, by the way, you're going to find that under your project properties, and this is under the debug UI. So you come down here to debug and click up open debug launch profiles. And let me make this a little bigger.
This is
And
a newer feature, that got introduced, right?
yes, this was definitely in 2022. Was it possibly 2019? But
I'm pretty
definitely,
sure it's 22.
I think it was 22. I think the issue is which release of 2020, because you see
Well,
the
that
big
I can tell
numbers.
you, yeah.
But my lord, the team is amazing. Just like the 18.2 update, there's new features, right? These aren't just bug fixes. We're getting bug fixes, performance, and new features. So you can see I changed this and we scroll down. Notice how the URL is just there. So you have your choice. But this also brings me in here because maybe I don't remember the setting. I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to make it so that I can call this get this data not from just random stuff. I'm going to get it from the database. How are we going to do that? Well, we need a database and we're going to use SQL Server debugging. So let's close that and let's come over here to view SQL Server Object Explorer, and you'll see I have SQL Server Express installed. I've got 2025 installed, and you'll see I've got a weather database and it's got a table called weather forecast, and I've also got a stored procedure called DBO. Sorry, I can't read. DBO get weather forecast. So this stored procedure will take in the information and then it'll see if the record's already there. If it is, it'll just return that ID. Otherwise, it'll insert it and return the ID. So pretty straightforward. Now, that said, I started working on this. I wrote the initial bit of code, and the code on the client side isn't wonderful. Again, it's not meant for production use. But I've got code that calls it, that's all that's important. And in fact, here's what's one of the really cool things is notice I can come over here and set a breakpoint. Aha. So how are we going to make that work? Well, it turns out two things. I need some code to call it because right now I'm just making it up as I go. And two, there's one extra setting. So I'm going to come back and really show these settings so people get it. So let's first change the code. So we'll come over here to our web service and let's just go in full code mode for a second. We'll turn off the breakpoint and we're going to replace this code. Now, in order for this code to work, we're going to need an extra project reference. Because I'm talking to the database, we're going to need to be able to talk to SQL Server with SQL Client. That's what I'm going to use. Now, definitely, if you're an Entity Framework type of person, you can do that as well. I've been around the block if you look at the gray hair, so I prefer SQL Client. But again, uh, do whatever makes you happy. So we'll go over to Manage NuGet Packages, go to Browse, and we'll type SQL Client.
Now, quick question, is the debug configuration, window the only spot where you can enable SQL Server debugging, or can you do it in another location? Or could you do it in another location before the introduction of that window?
So there's actually two pieces. Part one is you need to tell your project that you want it enabled so that when Visual Studio loads it, it says, oh, I need to hook up and do the extra dance here. That can be, it's actually stored in the local settings file. Unfortunately, for older .NET projects, it gets embedded inside the project configuration file. So that's the way you do it generally.
Gotcha.
And I'll show that in a second. So I'm going to install SQL Client into my web project. Okay. And I'm going to do a build real quick just to make sure. We'll look down in the lower corner. It all builds. So what I'm going to do here is replace this code with some code I have over here in Visual Notepad. And I'm just going to replace the class settings. So we'll just come over here, Control A, and let me give myself a little room and do this so everybody can see. And we'll just start at the top. Okay, first of all, I'm using system.data and the data client. I'm using dependency injection to load configuration data because I need a connection string. Now I'm going to use integrated security. So the good news is my connection string will not have a username and password in it, but we definitely do not want to put connection strings hard coded in our code. And if you were to need a password because maybe you can't use integrated security, then we should have someone who's a security expert. I can pretend to be one, but you want to look at things like DP API for local secrets. There is a secret settings file, or better yet, you probably should be using something like Key Vault in Azure, or other types of technology from like HashiCorp has one. And as your local for your local machine, 1Password has a CLI interface that you can hook in as well. So the bottom line is, please, 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 no passwords in source code and not in your config files. So we're going to use dependency injection to load up the configuration data. And then you'll see that we'll get the connection string called default connections. Then the code is just really ridiculous. I'm going to call the store procedure 5 times, once for the 5 possible dates, and we'll return it to the client. Now I've got weather forecast does not contain ID. Okay, so I forgot I need to modify that. So let me jump out of full screen view. And let's go over here to weather forecast. And we'll do public int. There we go. Look at that. Sometimes I don't have to think with AI. All right, let's do a
Nope.
build. Make sure I didn't break it. Okay. And so we're going to come over here to app settings. And you notice that there's app settings and there's app settings.development. This has been around for years, but this is a great feature of modern ASP.NET Core, as in that I can have different configuration files and I can change the extension in between the app settings and the .json, and I can then just use environment variables and it'll automatically switch between them. It's just chef's kiss. Love it.
Love it.
And by the way, for .NET FX, if you want something similar, take a look at the Slow Cheetah extension that's available. It kind of mimics some of that. That said, with modern Windows forms, you can actually get some of this to work. In either case, if we go inside there, we're going to need that connection string. And sure enough, I've got that over here. And so we'll just grab that, come down here, put a comma, boom. So local SQL Express, the database I showed you, trusted connection. And this is something I've seen on Reddit, Stack Overflow, that people run into with newer versions of SQL Server. I'm using the latest 2025 locally. And trusted connection just means I'm using integrated security. That's actually an alias for the term integrated security. However, if you go along further, you'll notice this trust server certificate. Again, always trying to make applications more secure. You need to say trust this by default when you're just doing a local installation, because by default, the certificate is just a locally signed cert. Okay. If you live in an organization that manages certificates and keys, they can issue a certificate, and then you wouldn't have to say that because you would get a real certificate. But you need this when developing locally if you don't do that. Footnote, you do not want to use this setting in production, particularly against Azure SQL or SQL Azure, because SQL Azure should be giving you a valid certificate. If it doesn't, you don't want to trust it. So again, little tangent there, but again, those are the things we want to give here as tips and tricks. So we've got our code, we've got our connection string. So now let's start with just the fact of, can this debug? So I'm going to F5. I'm going to click Get Weather. Hit F5 again. And now the moment of truth. F10. Look down here and, oh, look at that. So you're like, look at what? All that goo?
Alright.
Oh, there it is. There
Carry
it
on.
is. Look, I even
Oh
got the
my
tooltip. Somebody loves me. There we go. So there you go. We're getting the connection string. So I got all the configuration, dependency injection did its job. Chef's kiss. Thank you, folks. And we'll do an F10. Open the connection. There I'm using a wait. I'm doing this properly on the server. Thank you very much. And if I have 5, there you go. There's the data. So we
Nice.
are happy as clams. But did I really call the store procedure? Hmm. Well, let's prove it. So, a reminder, you go into the debug properties for the project that's going to talk to SQL Server. In this case, it's the web API. If you're doing really old school client server, it would be the Windows form one, but we're doing it here. So you come into debug, go down to general, and if you scroll down, oh, sorry, you got, they moved this. Sorry, on the new format, it's actually debug, launch profile settings, find your profile, scroll down, enable SQL Server debugging. So that's part one. You do that. And as I promised, if we go into our local settings file, or launch settings.json, excuse me, you'll now see that there's a setting. SQL debugging is true. Okay. Now, the last bit. You notice we debugged, but it didn't go in there. That's because we need to come over here to our SQL Server reference or SQL Server, depending on how you want to say it. And notice there's this option right there. Allow SQL/CLR debugging. We don't talk about among polite company about CLR debugging inside SQL Server, but we do talk about SQL. This allows us to debug stored procedures and other programmable objects inside the server. Now, let's just have a little quick digression for people that maybe use SQL Server but aren't super nerds. We don't do this against production because this will stop all threads. This is bad for production environments. We do this for local and development testing. In particular, you have to have the necessary rights. Now, this is the benefit of doing this locally with my SQL Express instance. I've logged in as an admin. I can do this. In a non-developer workstation environment, you need to really think about this because you will effectively mess up everybody that's working with you in there. Okay. So number one, you have to have permissions. Number two, you need to think about the implications of doing this. So I'm going to turn that on. Now, when you do this, it says to do this, you must enable SQL Server debugging for the connection. Note that during debugging, all managed threads will stop. Do you wish to enable? Yes. Ignore the CLR part and just say yes. Okay. Now, footnote. All my research and working with this, still today, this is not a setting that lives anywhere. Visual Studio is doing some very low level stuff to talk to SQL Server and saying, hey, knock knock on a special interface via, believe it or not, COM for you old school folks. And it's basically querying a particular COM interface and saying, will you enable debugging? And it says, okay, who are you? Yes or no. And that's how they control that checkbox. And this is all done on the fly. So this is not something that we can put in a setting. Okay. But once it's on, if you right click, Visual Studio goes and checks and says, okay, is it enabled? Yes. So let's review our various windows. Okay, so there's our controller. We got our breakpoint there on the service. We don't need app config, so let's clean that up. And we don't need this UI right now or the JSON file. Our form we want, and we want our stored procedure. Okay, let's get rid of these extra files here, nice and tidy. So if I've done my job correctly, we'll go from the form to the service to the stored procedure. What do you think, Leslie?
I'm thinking that is looking pretty good. I think all of it is just gonna just work as we've been saying throughout.
Magic, baby. It's a new year.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, we'll click start. There's my giant tour de force UI. Okay, client, F5. Server, F5. Stored procedure.
Yay.
Look at that. And, you come in here, you go to your locals, and you can see the data that was passed in to, excuse me, to SQL Server from the service. Now I'm gonna
Yep.
hit F5, and we should see this 5 times.
Yeah.
3, 4, 5, and out, and back to the UI. And that's how the magic works. Now, I wanna cover 2 things about this type of debugging. Again, do it locally, not on the server. If we go to the weather forecast, you'll notice I have this extra bit of code that I wanna focus on right here. If the debugger is attached, I've increased my timeout. And why? Because depending upon the speed of your machine, what you're doing, it may take longer to get things started, but more importantly, you're debugging. Well, when we debug in real time and just run, or sorry, when we run code in real time, it's in microseconds, it's in, milliseconds. When you're stepping, you're in seconds. And then you get to, oh, wonder why that's doing that. Oh, let me run this query against a large table. Next thing you know, you time out and that'll break your whole debug chain. So you want to buff that up. You can go wild and crazy and put 0, but boy, make sure you wrap that into the debugger statement. Make sure that doesn't end up in prod. So that makes it all wonderful. Now, this is great, but I don't always want to step into that store procedure, right? So what if I were able to have some flexibility in my configuration? Also, right now it's all local. I'm going local client to local service to local database. What if I wanted to mix those things up? This is where debug targets come in. And again, on behalf of Microsoft, I apologize that they haven't updated .NET FX to support this out of the box, but there are ways to solve this, and I'll show you. Okay, step 1. Let's talk about what I'm rambling about here. If we go to project properties, or sorry, configure starter projects, we have one launch profile. But if I come over here, I can duplicate it. And so I'm going to come over here and modify this to say dash SQL. Okay. Now, what I want is when this profile is set up, I want to launch the web API and I want it to have SQL debugging enabled. How am I going to do that? So I'll come over here and click OK. Then I'll open up launch settings. I'm going to take the HTTPS settings, and we'll include that little comma there. And we'll change it to be HTTPS to SQL. And we'll leave SQL debugging true. And here, we'll set it to false. Or you can completely remove the setting. Okay? Now, let me pause here for this for a second. First of all, notice you can control the URL. You can actually change the URL. Any of these settings you pick will affect that particular debug target. So now if I go back into configure startup projects, I can switch this to be HTTPS to SQL. Whereas when I use client server, it'll just use HTTPS and it won't do debugging. So we'll click OK. And now all you have to do is when you click the drop down here, you can pick which launch profile you want, and that will load those different settings. Fantastic. So I can come over here, pick this one, hit start, click my button, F5, F5, F5. And we'll do it 4 more times for
Mhm.
good luck. And there
Emphasis.
you go. Whereas all I need to do is stop debugging, switch profiles, F5, run it, F5, F5, and back. That is just makes me so happy.
It's
Now,
looking good.
you
And
what?
again, like that's stuff where and outside of like BS or and lesser IDEs that don't have this kind of functionality, you somehow have to connect all of this
It's a lot more work. And what
manually.
people play with it. Underneath the covers, one of the things that the .NET Core stuff takes advantage of is environment variables and different things that you can do to make this work um, cross-platform. Because of course, launch settings is a feature that would work on other platforms, but Visual Studio just makes it that much easier, giving you a nice UI as well as the ability to do it by hand in the config file. So, there's no real magic here. And again, the only thing that really we don't have a lot of control over is this setting. Now, when you're using SQL Express against a small database, having this turned on is not going to make your life horrible, right? But you generally don't want it on unless you actually are debugging, right? So
Sure.
again, like I said, I have not found a way to automate this short of doing some really weird, unsupported, nasty stuff. So just remember that you want to turn that on and off. Otherwise, you can switch between them while you're doing this kind of work and not have to deal with it. And that takes me back to that launch settings and the fact that, okay, so this means I could change the environment and also I could then change the connection string to where instead of using a local server, I could have a remote server. And so I could load a different JSON file because what I would do is simply come into here and change development to development remote, for example. I would then duplicate this file. So we'll copy this, paste it, rename. Okay. And just make sure I name that correctly. No, development remote, because, that's what happens in the afternoon. There we go. And so what'll happen is when I pick that, not only will it pick the right settings for SQL debugging, it'll instead load this JSON file automatically, and then I can have a different server URL. Now, footnote, there's a lot more to do this remote. Maybe Leslie will have me back and we'll cover doing it across the wire because there's some more complexity because, well, security, firewalls, all that good stuff.
Yep.
Uh, and dare I say, for some of you old timers, decom. Ooh, lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, decom. Oh my, Corba. Oh my. Anyway, so that's one thing I want to point out is that flexibility is using those two things together, both for settings and configuration. Ah, wonderful. Now you're like, okay, well, this is cool, Brian, but what about my client? What if I wanted to have, for example, a different service base URL? Okay, that gets a little more complicated, but not horribly. Let me explain. I created a Windows Form .NET Framework application for backwards compatibility and not to, break the world's enterprises that use Windows Forms. It works the way people expect it from the last almost oh god, more than 2 decades, right? Visual Studio is 25 years old, right? Sorry, no.
Yeah.
Visual Studio's
Oh,
30? Is it
I
30
think
yet?
it's darn it. I was one of the hosts of the anniversary for it. I should know. Oh, it was a couple of years ago.
Well, I think we said it could definitely, it could, drive, vote, and I think it can illegally drink in most, parts of the world.
I
Okay,
think so too.
um,
I'm about to cheat right now.
okay, you cheat while I blabber, but anyway, the point is compatibility. However, one of the things that's wonderful about modern .NET is if I double click on the project, I get this SDK-style project file. Now, we don't get that here. When I double click, it just opens and closes. And if I want to see it, I have to come down here to unload the project, and then I get the big old school XML one. So
It's
this doesn't,
29.
it's
It's
29.
29. Yeah, it turned
Oh, that's right,
25 in
1997.
2022. Yep.
There we go.
Not
Okay.
quite
So
30,
next
but
year,
getting there.
the big 3-0. All right.
Yep.
So this is the old form. Now there's Copilot's got a modernize button. I don't know if it'll do that yet, so I'll have to play with that and come back to you. But we're going to put this back by closing this, and then we're going to reload. What if I wanted to get this effect? Well, it turns out if you create a new Windows Form project and you pick just Windows Form app, this will give you an idea what has to happen. So let me explain. You hit next. Okay, hit next. And notice this time it says which version. Now, again, stay with me, folks. Hit create, and I get a Windows Form project. But if I double click, notice I get the new modern version. Now, here's the critical aspect. This file type is supported with .NET FX. It just requires you to use either the modernization tools, the upgrade tools, or you do it by hand. So, assuming you are willing to take that on, and just so you know, I just recently finished a sprint with a customer and another one of my fellow developers, and we upgraded this project set over 100 projects. So this I can speak from experience. This does work, but it does work. You know, you're gonna, in my opinion, with large projects like the one we're working on, we had better luck just doing it by hand. If you have a small one, sure, rip and tear on the modernization tools and try it out. But in either case, you'll notice this target framework. So we have .NET 10. Well, it turns out if we come over here, I've got a pre-built one. Happy holidays. And if we go look at it, notice target framework .NET 481 output type WinExe. If you do that, then what you'll get is a launch settings file, just like we have for ASP.NET Core, Web API, etc. So then this will light up in the project dialog, the multiple projects dialog, and allow you to choose the target. So again, if maybe folks, give us your feedback, we can spend more time. I can go through upgrading one and showing you the details, but I wanted you to be aware of this. Now, one more thing. Now, it turns out that this got snuck in, again, as we talked about. Visual Studio 2022 was not just one release. They snuck this in all the way back in September of 2024. In the multi-project launch configuration dialog box, they added a new checkbox, and this is available in 2022 and 2026. So let me open up my previous project. Let's go to project, let's go to our configure startup projects. You'll note this puppy dog right. Oops. Again, Scott's screaming. He's screaming at me now a lot.
The
There we go.
There you go.
Share profile. So when you use this dialog out of the box without this setting checked, what happens is the information is stored in the solutions.user file, or SUO file, I believe it is, in this case. And that file is not checked into version control by default, which means it's private to you. By clicking share, and in fact, let me cancel. Let me open up File Explorer. Okay, so if we look at the folder right now, there's and by the way, we're using the new SLNX file format. There's the launch.user file. But if we come back over here, go to, whoops, one more time, configure. If we go over and click share profile and click apply, notice I have a new file in the File Explorer. And
Mhm.
if I right click on this and say open with anywhere, there it is, open with Visual Studio Code. Look at that. So you now have a JSON file that you can share with your team and they'll be able to see those settings. And notice it only has client server. This allows you to control which of those profiles you want to share and which ones you just want for yourself. So you might want to come with a naming convention, Brian only or Leslie only. And then the other ones can say team or whatever you want to do, however you distinguish the two between them. But
Sweet.
that is
Um,
just awesome.
yeah, that's a time saver. I think we've all been there where we're trying to, like, clone someone's repo, and they might leave some instructions on how to get it to work, but then you're struggling, especially when there's multiple projects involved and all these extra config things that they didn't factor in. So, the fact that you can just have this file in the solution itself for other people to not have to worry about it
Yeah,
is
and you
really
could
nice.
people can
So,
contribute to it. I mean,
yeah.
just it's so simple, and again, when we started talking about doing this talk, I was like, there's just these little details that you may have missed, right? And again, I noticed it in 2026. I didn't realize it snuck in 2022. It just my brain just kind of you glaze over when you see those dialogues. You get in there, you make your changes, and you jump out. So really, if I were to summarize everything, number one, multi-project debugging in Visual Studio is just what makes it the premier development environment. Go ahead and at me on that. I'll fight you on that one. I think it's
It's
wonderful.
definitely one of those. Like, I
Um,
don't even know if VS Code has something like this. I feel like it doesn't, or if it does, it's not very discoverable because I always struggle when I'm dealing with multiple projects over there. But
yeah, it's definitely Visual Studio Code because it has access to a lot of the great debugging technology Microsoft has does do it. But again, I think Visual Studio is just light years ahead, and it should be right. It is
yeah.
uh,
Yeah, for
designed.
people who are upset that, like, VS is sometimes is usually the one catching up to features that VS Code has, this is, like, the rare time where that is not the case, and
Yeah,
I would like VS Code to be better.
and 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 this is just an example, but then the actual debugging experience again just
Yeah.
is light years. So that makes it wonderful. The cross project stuff, throwing in the fact that you can do SQL Server Store Procedure and other data object debugging is really nice. The fact that it flows between them. And with this extra bit of launch settings files and configuration, which, like I said, you can bring to Windows Forms. And by the way, footnote, if you can't upgrade to a .NET SDK form, there's ways to do it. It's just requires a little bit of extra work on your part on the Windows Form side. But with environment variables, you too can get that similar experience. You just won't get some of the nice UI for the Windows Form project. But, in general, I wanted to show that you may have missed some things, you may not have realized, but if you're new to this is why Visual Studio really has such passionate fans because it is awesome. So that's what I've got for today. Anything else you want to talk about on this, Leslie, that I didn't talk about?
No, I think that was pretty thorough, and I'm sure you'll be back for, like, a part 2 or, whatever else because 'cause you're pretty you're no stranger at this point.
No, yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah, I guess the main question to close out with is where can people find you? I know you're a developer advocate at GitHub, so
No, I'm not anymore. They
you're not anymore? Oh, shoot, I thought you
no,
were.
yep. No,
Shoot,
I'm just a wild man with a wild dream out on the other side. So
cool. Yeah, where
let's
can people
see.
find you in the wild?
I'm at Brian Randall on the socials. You can also just you can email me. Those are probably the two best places. This will work on X and Blue Sky. Feel free to email me. I'll do my best to answer. Ping me on socials, and I do have a blog that occasionally I write on at blog.brianrandall.com. So there you go.
Well, I think that concludes our episode for now. So stay tuned. I'm sure Brian is going to be back for another episode or potentially part 2 right below in the comments if you want to learn even more. Well, Brian, thank you once again for joining us. And thanks to all the viewers for watching. Definitely go try out all the stuff that we talked about regarding multi project debugging. Save yourself the headache and share your feedback as always on the developer community if you're like me and you really want to see some of these windows become tabs. So until next time, happy coding, y'all. Thanks.